That I from Maryland, the majority leader for the House.
I thank Mr. Scalise for yielding. Madam Speaker, on Tuesday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed, as usual, till 6:30 p.m. On Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and 12 p.m. for legislative business. And again, as usual, on Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. The House, Madam Speaker, will consider Senate 2959, the Supplemental Impact Aid Flexibility Act, under suspension of the rules. This bill passed the Senate unanimously, is on suspension in the House. It's co-authored by Representative Joe Courtney of the House. This bipartisan legislation allows local educational agencies participating in the Impact Aid program to use the student count or federal property valuation data from their fiscal year 22 program applications for their fiscal year 2023 applications. This, Madam Speaker, will prevent schools from losing substantial funding upon which they rely to address COVID-19 learning loss by giving them more flexibility to use pre-pandemic data to calculate funding needs. The House may consider other bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business tomorrow. The House will also consider H.R. 4673, the eVest Act, sponsored by Chairman Mark Turcano of the Veterans Affairs Committee, the rule for which we adopted this week. This legislation would automatically enroll eligible veterans into the VA healthcare system so that no veterans are left behind when it comes to receiving quality, affordable health care. Lastly, Madam Speaker, the House stands ready to act on the Build Back Better Act, as well as the Freedom to Vote and John R. Lewis Act, should the Senate amend them and send them back to us. Additional legislative items, of course, are possible. And I yield to my friend from Louisiana.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. On the school bill, I know one of the big concerns many people have been raising is trying to get schools opened again. Last week it was reported that 5,200 different schools were closed last week. And I know this body has, this Congress has sent billions of dollars to school systems across the country. The intent was that that money be used to get schools opened, and yet there are some schools taking the money and staying closed, which goes against all the medical science out there. We know the damage that's doing to our young kids, but learning, depression, so many other challenges that it creates for them. Will there be any part of that legislation that helps require that in order to get money, schools have to be open? And I will yield.
Because I don't have it in front of me and I haven't read it as carefully as perhaps I should have, but I don't know the specific answer to that question. What I do want to say, however, is that we need to have kids in school. Everybody says that the learning experience is substantially compromised by virtual learning. It's better than nothing, and it's been pursued very vigorously and with great positive effect. But having said that, we all think that young people ought to be back in schools. But I don't know whether this bill, which passed the Senate unanimously, deals with that particular aspect that the gentleman asked about. But let me say this, that I think every school system has adopted the premise that in school is better. Clearly, we have been assaulted by a virus whose transmissibility is substantially more than the previous virus, the Delta variant. The Omicron variant, as we know, one of the problems is it's easily caught, easily transmitted. The good news is if you've taken a vaccination and had a booster, your likelihood of you going to the hospital is much smaller. And if you go to the hospital, you're much less sick. But having said that, we continue to have a challenge to get this under control. And the administration properly so, and the overwhelming majority of the medical community properly so, and the overwhelming majority of scientists are recommending that we wear a mask, that we wear a KN95 or N95 mask, because they're much better than the surgical masks or the cloth masks, that we continue to wash our hands regularly, and then we continue to keep distance. But the gentleman and I agree that we need to ensure that to the extent that it is possible, and that parents will send their children to school because of being dissuaded by the transmissibility of this disease, we need to have kids in school.
Well, gentlemen,
I'll yield back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Maybe we can work on something that would ensure that as tax dollars are going to school systems, that it's going to keep the schools open, not to allow them to then shut down on the kids, because as we know, the science is very clear that kids are much better off in school, safer in school than not being in school, and then the learning experience dramatically less if they're not in school, as well as the mental conditions, the social development that's not occurring if they are not in the classroom. So we'll see. And I'll be happy to yield on that.
Because I think I think everybody's concerned about this. Certainly every parent in my district and your district is concerned about this, and anybody who's concerned about the welfare of our children is concerned about it. But I think it would be appropriate for me to say that the teachers of America, and now my wife was a teacher, and I happen to believe that teachers are the most important people in any society because they educate the leadership and the citizens of tomorrow. But they have been put to an extraordinary challenge. And I have a granddaughter who has 4 children, so I have 4 great-grandchildren, 3 of whom are in school, and we're in school in 2020 and 2021. And Judy, my granddaughter, who's named after my wife, has told me on numerous occasions what extraordinary ends her children's teacher, there were 3 different teachers at different levels in the school system, the extraordinary efforts to which the teachers went to make sure that while they were home, while they were learning virtually, that they had a positive, productive experience. But all of them felt, I think, a lot easier to have kids in school if they can do so safely. But I think that bears saying, like medical personnel, they have been put to extraordinary stress, as have parents generally been put to stress. So I think the gentleman's concern is rightfully placed, and we need to do everything we can to make sure kids get back in school and to have a learning experience like you and I had in the classroom. I yield back.
Thank you. And our teachers have been true heroes through this. Our hospital, our frontline hospital workers, people that work at grocery stores. We've seen so many people rising up to the challenge, and even where governments failed their ability to do their job. I know one challenge that hopefully we see resolved at the United States Supreme Court. It won't be today. We were expecting it maybe this week, but hopefully early next week we see the Supreme Court resolve these challenges where there were mandates on vaccines that required people to get fired from their job if they chose a healthcare decision on vaccinations. I've been vaccinated. I know a gentleman from Maryland has too, but for those who haven't, whether they're frontline hospital workers, teachers, people shouldn't be forced to lose their job based on that choice they make. But the Supreme Court will hopefully address that and resolve that next week. Something that's out of our hands now, but it is in the courts at the highest level. And I would yield to the gentleman on that.
Just because by my silence, I understand the gentleman's position, which is held by a number of people. My own view is that employers make a reasonable decision when they say to an employee, for the sake not only of the employee, but for everybody else in the workplace with whom they work, that is, you're required to be vaccinated because we believe that science and medical personnel tell us that is a much safer route. But I understand there's a difference on that. I personally, but even then, I know governors who have been against vaccines are not necessarily against the employer requiring that as an employee requirement as opposed to a governmental requirement.
Yeah, and I would hope the government would drop that mandate, but if not, it's hopeful that the court would make it clear that the government doesn't have the authority to require that people get fired if they don't get vaccinated. Encourage people to follow the science. If they have questions or concerns, it's a conversation they should have with their doctor, not a government mandate. But as the gentleman knows, we may have disagreement on that, but fortunately for us, it will get resolved at the Supreme Court, hopefully early next week. I wanted to ask the gentleman, as well as we're looking at the schedule for next week, I didn't notice any of the bills that we've highlighted in the past that would address some of the many crises our country is facing, whether it's inflation, whether it's high gas prices, whether it's the border crisis, all that are running out of control, the empty shelves that we're seeing at so many stores. Will the gentleman commit to working with us to bring some of the bills to the floor to address the real crises that are hurting hardworking families, like the ones I just mentioned? And I would yield.
Well, the gentleman yield?
Yeah, not yield.
There's no doubt, first of all, let me say, inflation is a serious challenge confronting American families, particularly working families in this country. I live alone, and because it's just one person, I buy relatively small amounts of food at the grocery store. And I go to the grocery store nowadays, and whether it's the price of bacon, which is at $12 a pound for a good Hormel or another meat packing, it's high. And I think to myself how a family not doing as well as I'm doing and with kids to feed, how tough it is on them. So this inflation is very tough. It's a worldwide phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that's caused, obviously, by a pent-up demand, asking for a lot of goods and chasing a lot of goods. And elementary economics that any of us took in college know that there's a lot of resources chasing few resources, i.e. a lot of money chasing a short supply of goods, and that you have that demand that it drives prices up. This pandemic has had a global effect on supply chain. The supply chain has been substantially affected. This was not the fault of, frankly, either Biden or his predecessor in terms of what happened in the supply chain. In Singapore, they shut down companies, as you know, for months at a time. They just shut them down, which is one of the things that's led to this chip shortage, which has had ramifications. So I want to assure the gentleman that the administration, our side of the aisle, I know your side of the aisle, very concerned about the inflationary pressure that is putting such a stress on America's families. This pandemic has caused extraordinary, historic things to happen. That's the bad news. The good news is we've created more jobs in the last year and 2 months than were created. Of course, net, we lost jobs for the previous 4 years. Over 2 million jobs net lost. So the good news is that we have a number of economic statistics that are, in fact, positive. However, having said that, we do need to be very concerned about inflation. The administration expressed their concern. We believe that the infrastructure bill will have a positive impact on inflation, assuming the Build Back Better Act passes, which I assume at some point it will. I think that's going to have a very positive effect on inflation because it will help the supply chain. It'll help the health of the people, employees. It'll make people more able to get out. Child care is going to help people get back to work, which will have a positive impact on the supply chain and on the availability of goods and services. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Unemployment, as the gentleman knows, was down at 3.9%. So while inflation is up and unacceptably high, historically high over the last 40 years, we need to get it down. And we see this phenomena happening all over the world. This is not the fault of the president or the Congress. It's the fault of an extraordinary, invasive, and widespread disease that has caused extraordinary disruptions within our society and economy. But we need to get a handle on it. We need to take action. So I'll talk to the gentleman about what issues he believes would be helpful in that regard.
And the gentleman yields back. Clearly, some of those bills that have been discussed and offered up in the past to address the inflationary problems, but also the policies of this administration that have caused that. And as we know from the energy crisis, it's not pandemic related that gas prices are so high. This president made a decision starting on day one of his administration to shut down American energy production, to shut down pipelines in America, greenlighting pipelines in other countries, begging foreign countries to make more oil, but shutting off and making it harder to make energy in America. Clearly, that self-imposed supply shortage has created higher prices that we would love to see addressed. We might disagree philosophically on how to get there, but I don't think there's much disagreement from people who spend over $100 filling their car up that it needs to change. But if you look at the workforce challenges, and every small business owner I talk to, I would imagine all of us could share similar stories. Our small business owners are telling us they can't find workers. You know, somebody might want to go to their favorite restaurant, but they're waiting an hour and a half and wondering why a third of the tables are empty because they can't get people to work. And so, as some might want to look at the unemployment number, clearly the number of people that are not even in the workforce that just stop working because they can get paid right now large amounts of money to stay at home is a challenge that we should confront here in this Congress to help encourage people to get back into the workforce, not to be paying people not to work. And the enhanced unemployment benefits were one part of that problem, but there are many other parts of that problem. But it's the idea that there are too many dollars, as the gentleman said. Chasing too few goods is the driver of inflation, but the biggest driver of that is all of the money that's been spent in Washington. And if you look at about $6 trillion that's been spent on various relief packages, some of it was targeted to COVID, which we all supported, very bipartisan. Some of it had nothing to do with COVID, which unfortunately has created higher inflation. There is talk right now that the administration, and I'm not sure if the Democrat leadership is having serious conversations on this, is looking at yet another bill, potentially over $1 trillion of additional spending. I would ask the gentleman, is that something being anticipated to be brought to the floor? I would urge, if that's being looked at, to not do it, because there's about $800 billion remaining from other relief packages that are unspent. And hopefully we stop the spending in Washington that's driving inflation and try to encourage the economy to get opened at a more rapid pace. And if people need additional help, to look to the money that's sitting there, the $800 billion that's unspent, rather than trillions more dollars that would be put into a marketplace that's already oversaturated with federal spending that's driving this inflation. And I would yield.
Thank you very much. Of course, as you know better than probably anybody, the Speaker appointed a task force to look exactly at that issue of the $800 billion and what has been done, what's been spent, to make sure that it's been properly spent, because you're the ranking member on the committee headed up by Jim Clyburn that is looking at those issues. I know you had a hearing this past week. Yes, we have a difference of opinion. The difference of opinion, you call it spending, I call it investment. We're investing in our children, we're investing in our families, we're investing in small businesses, we're investing in growth and opportunity, and we're investing in the ability of those folks that you talk about that are not in the workforce, the restaurant can't hire. Why can't they hire them? Because they're not paying sufficient amount to justify a mom getting child care, because child care is so expensive. So she's caught, or a single dad is caught in the catch-22 situation. If I go to work, I'll earn money, but I'll pay it all to child care. If I'm going to pay it all to child care, it's much better for me as a parent to be with my child, if the net result's going to be pretty much a wash. We're investing in that. We're investing in child care in the Build Back Better Act. We're investing in early childhood education, 3 and 4-year-olds. We believe that's investment, and it also is very important for that small business person, so that that mom or dad who has that child who's then going to go and be in a preschool environment can have time to themselves, so that they can in fact pursue employment without simply putting it from one pocket to another pocket, none of which is their pocket. We believe the difference, I think, really is you look at it as spending, we look at it as investment. We think it will have a big, big return for our country. And that's what Build Back Better is about. And it's building back better. You say it was not related to the pandemic. It clearly was related to the pandemic. The pandemic hit us in the gut. It hit everybody throughout the world in the gut. We have recovered better than anybody else in the world. And that's because we invested, sometimes in a bipartisan way, and sometimes in a partisan way. But we invested in our people, in our children, our families, our businesses, and in our health generally of our country, and indeed trying to help other parts of the world as well, because this is a global pandemic that affects us all. But I think the real difference is we perceive this as an investment. We think it will help grow America. You know, I have as I'm sure you've heard me talk about from time to time, Make It in America agenda. Our investment in both the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better will have a positive effect on making it in America. So we see it, Mr. Whip, as investment. We think it'll have a positive effect. We think it is having a positive effect. And as I say, unemployment's down below 4%, and jobs are up over 6 million over the last 11 months. So that's a good accomplishment. Is it enough? Do we still have people who aren't working for a varied number of reasons, and many of which are related to COVID-19? So we see it as an investment, and I'm hopeful the Build Back Better Act will pass, and I think that will have a positive effect, not only, as the President says, on the next 5 years, but on the next 5 generations. And so we're continuing to pursue that. But inflation, which is how we started this discussion, is a problem, and we need to deal with it. And I'd be glad to talk to the gentleman about what he thinks would be helpful to do that. And I know part of that is stop spending money. I think if we stop investing money, our country will not get to where it wants to be. And where it is now, with respect to the rest of the world, leading the rest of the world in terms of economic recovery from the pandemic. We're not there yet, but we're going to get there.
Thank the gentleman, and clearly we have a difference on what the effects of spending trillions of dollars would have, and Build Back Better, as the gentleman brought up, would be about $4.5 trillion of higher taxes, additional spending, things that by many accounts would increase inflation even higher. But we'll see where the Senate goes on that bill. I'm not sure if the gentleman's anticipating bringing other legislation, the bipartisan bills that we did to do things like create Operation Warp Speed, which was maybe one of the most successful things government did in reaction to a pandemic in the history of the world, to come up with not 1, not 2, but now 3 proven and effective vaccines in less than a year to a virus no one even knew about. Never happened in the history of the world, but something that we came together, Republicans and Democrats, with President Trump to achieve, a great achievement. Something we would sure urge President Biden to build on, because President Biden did run with a promise that he would, quote, shut down the virus. Clearly, he has failed at that. We've asked through a number of different means to have hearings on some of the things we've heard concerns about, and I would start with testing. There was an article recently that the president was presented with a plan in October to come up with about 750 million tests that people could have for COVID at home that would be readily available by Christmas, where they in October anticipated a resurgence of COVID by December. It's been reported that the president rejected that plan. We've asked for a hearing into that. For whatever reason, the majority has not agreed to that. Here was a letter I had sent to Mr. Clyburn and Ms. Maloney through the Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus, as well as through the Oversight Committee. Myself and Ranking Member Comer asked to have a hearing into some of these things. The testing failures that were reported, if they're true, we ought to hear about them. If they're false, the administration ought to be pointing that out. They have not, which tells me they must be true. But then why in October would the president have rejected a testing plan that could have prevented us from getting to the place we're at right now with this resurgence? What about some of the national plans that the president said he had as a candidate that then he later told governors recently he doesn't have a national plan on COVID. The mixed messaging coming from the administration is causing tremendous confusion across America, and we've asked that we have hearings to clarify, give the administration a chance to state their plan or the lack thereof, state whether or not they rejected a massive testing plan for the nation in October that would have prevented what happened in December. The lack of desire by the administration to be transparent about any of this is creating tremendous confusion across the country. This Congress could address that by holding hearings to get the facts out. I know we're going to continue to press for those kinds of hearings. I would hope we have them, but so far we have not gotten any response to the affirmative on that. And I don't know if the gentleman has anything to add. Maybe the gentleman would agree that we would have these kind of hearings to get some of these facts out or get some of these issues addressed, and I would yield.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding, and I would say at the outset, I believe the committee on which he serves with Mr. Clyburn is one of the committees, among many, who ought to be looking at those facts. But let me say this, because in stating the facts as you just did, the appearance is that substantial progress has not been made. I don't think that premise is correct. Let me read you some statistics. Last year, the first year the president came into office, and testing in America was molecular and at-home tests per day. Last year, beginning of last year, 1.7 million per day. Today, 11.7 million tests per day are being conducted. So to imply that somehow there hasn't been substantial progress, that is a tenfold increase in the testing available to Americans every day. When Biden took office, 0 at-home rapid tests were available to consumers, 0. Today, 300 million at-home rapid tests are on the market each month. Enough? No. Are more coming? Yes. Has the government used the Defense Production Act to accomplish greater production? They have. The administration started using, as I said, just the Defense Production Act. Biden administration is increasing places people can get free tests, for instance. You talk about a plan. When Biden took office, there were only 2,500 pharmacies offering free testing. Today, there are 20,000 sites, an eightfold increase. The administration is purchasing 500 million at-home rapid tests to be distributed for free to Americans who want them, with initial deliveries starting this month. The administration is distributing up to 50 million free at-home self-tests to community health centers and rural health clinics. In addition, already covering PCR tests, the administration is requiring private insurance plans to cover at-home tests starting on January 15th, just a couple of days from today. So a lot is happening. Is enough happening? Enough's not happening until everybody has immediate availability. Immediate may overstate it, but easy access. The fact is that some people are having problems finding the at-home test now, and we need to work on that. But those statistics show you that extraordinary increases have occurred under the Biden administration, and that is their plan, to make sure that these tests are available, because we know that testing will make a difference. So that if you find out if you're sick, you do quarantine. But I suggest to the gentleman that the Biden administration has made an extraordinary difference. Is the situation not where we want it to be? Absolutely it's not. Do we have a new variant that apparently came out of South Africa, or at least was first identified in South Africa, that spiked up? I talked to Dr. Monahan yesterday. Apparently, just in recent days, we've had a fall off in disease recognized. I hope that's the case. I hope it keeps going down because we are perhaps now using the KN95 or N95 mask and keeping our distance a little more conscientiously. Let's hope all of that works for the people, for the country, and for the globe. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The problem with President Biden's plan is that it's been reactionary, not visionary. When he was presented with a plan in October to make sure that every American that needed a test would have it in December, when they in October said there will probably be a real uptick in December, the president said no to that. So if today he says, let's go and order 500 million tests, that sounds fine and well, except that he said no to that in October when he could have staved off what we see, and that is hours-long lines of people to get tested. People shouldn't have to be waiting 5 hours in a line to get tested when the president in October was presented with a plan. And again, if he wasn't, as it's been reported, he should come out publicly and say that. The report's been out for weeks now, and he hasn't done that. We should be having hearings on this to find out what was the plan that was presented, who was involved, by the way, in rejecting that plan. Was the CDC involved? Was NIH involved? Was HHS involved in rejecting a forward-thinking plan in October that predicted what inevitably did happen this Christmas? Who was involved in the rejection of that plan, and why did they do it? Is it that the administration doesn't want accountability? I don't know, but we've asked those questions, and we've asked for a hearing on that, and we've been told it's not going to happen. I hope the gentleman would help push to get this to happen, to find this out, so that we don't play catch-up every time something happens, when there were people saying, hey, let's try to stop something before it becomes a problem. If there are people in the White House who said, no, we're not going to do it until it's a problem for families, those people ought to be removed from the White House. They shouldn't be involved in the decision-making chain, because their decisions caused maybe more deaths, surely caused a dramatic increase in the ills that people are facing right now, because it could have been staved off, and it wasn't. And we don't have that information from an administration who promised to be transparent. We did have a hearing a few days ago in the Select Subcommittee, and it was a private hearing. It wasn't open to the public. I didn't agree with that, but that was the decision made by the majority. We've got to start having transparency, as was promised to people. People deserve the transparency. They deserve to have these questions answered, and frankly, they deserve to have a more forward-thinking plan, not a reactionary plan when forward thinking was presented and rejected. I would yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This has been a pretty calm discussion so far. But let me remind the gentleman that the previous president said in February or March of 2020, this is going to go away in about 30 days. Don't worry about it. It'll go away. And a lot of your members said, we don't need a mask. We don't need to keep distance. We don't need to wash our hands. It's just going to go away. It's here today and gone tomorrow. That was the previous administration's plan. Now, I agree with you. Both the science community, the private sector community, and the government on Warp Speed did a good job. Extraordinary work in the private sector. Extraordinary work around the world because of the computer age in which we live, able to share information instantaneously in real time and say this alternative doesn't work, which accelerated greatly the ability to get within a year an extraordinary accomplishment, largely from our scientific and medical community, but facilitated by Warp Speed. No doubt about that. Give credit where credit is due. But very frankly, the leader, unlike President Biden said, this is a problem, we have to be careful, we have to pursue it, we have to invest, said no problem. Now, the gentleman conveniently forgets that. He also ignores the statistics I just gave, where we've had a 10-fold, 8-fold increase in the availability of testing and pharmaceutical access for literally millions of people. I mean, this is per day we're talking about. 11.7 million people per day. It doesn't take too long at that rate that the whole country, all 330 million people, in about a month and a few days, has been taken care of. So when you say we have to make progress, we have made extraordinary progress. And our view is, and I know we differ on this, we have made investments both in the American Recovery Act to deal with the pandemic crisis, with the infrastructure bill to create jobs and additional manufacturing capacity and training and apprenticeships for our people, and it'd build back better to make sure that our families can keep their head above water and can, in fact, have child care on which they can rely and they feel their children are safe so they can take a job and be productive citizens and add to the growth of our economy. So we believe we're doing that. Are we doing it perfectly? None of us do it perfectly. Perhaps do we need to do more, as the gentleman implies, and have hearings? The gentleman says he was in a hearing. Private or public, I presume the gentleman had an opportunity to ask questions of the witness. I don't know who the witnesses were, so I don't know what expertise they had. But I can't believe if you request of Mr. Clyburn that you have relevant witnesses to come by and that you want to question about the progress that either has been made or you think ought to be made or further things that could be done. I can't believe that he wouldn't agree to do that. But in any event, great progress is being made. But the entire world, not the Biden world, not America, the entire world is confronting a crisis, and it's having a tough time getting a hold of it. We have done it better than anybody else in terms of growing our economy and keeping our people's head above water. That's to be applauded. Do we still have a challenge? We do. Are we still working at it? We are. Do we need to continue? Yes. I yield.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And under President Trump, when he created Operation Warp Speed, the one thing he did say is that we're going to move red tape so that we can focus the entire scientific community, both the federal agencies, but also the private sector, in working together in removing the red tape so that they can focus on getting a vaccine. He didn't say 3, but he said, let's at least get them the ability to go. All of these great companies, many of that are American companies, to go put their innovation to work and get bureaucracy and red tape out of the way, follow science, but expedite so that we can get there quicker when many scientists, including some who still testify at committees today, said it was going to take years to get a vaccine. In less than a year, we had 3. And President Biden inherited that when he walked in the door, when he took the oath of office. He had 3 proven vaccines. And I know the gentleman talks about statistics. When you look at COVID deaths, because during the campaign, President Biden not only said he would crush the virus, but he said anybody who presided over that many deaths, and that was months before the election, doesn't deserve to be president of the United States. I thought that was an inappropriate statement. But more people have died under President Biden's watch from COVID than under President Trump's. It was an unfair standard that President Biden put in place when he was at one of the debates. But if he's going to say things like, I'm going to crush the virus and I'm going to have a plan, and then he comes out and obviously didn't crush the virus and then tells governors that there is no federal plan, I do think that's a mixed message at the least, that a dereliction in his promise at the worst that ought to be confronted. What is the plan? If there's a plan. If there's not a plan, admit there's not a plan. But you campaigned saying there was going to be a plan, and clearly there's not one. But those are other facts that we can put on the table. But clearly when you look at how President Trump pushed the federal government to work and partner with the private sector to move red tape so we can expedite the research and the trials, more tests than were ever done maybe on any other attempt for a vaccine, and come up in less than a year with vaccines when many said it would take years. Clearly a remarkable achievement that we all worked on. Mm-hmm. President Trump led the effort. We funded it in a very bipartisan way, and it was very effective. Obviously, this is a challenge for every country, but there were other things said that ought to be put out there, and let's at least try to all be saying the same thing and focusing on the same thing. And when scientific experts say, this is what we anticipate happening, if you're going to reject that science, at least hold people accountable who were part of the discussions to reject that science, as I refer to the October rejection of a testing plan that would have been in effect for December that was rejected. And
look, for a long time, the President of the United States, the former President of the United States, apparently changed his view now and criticized DeSantis for not pursuing mask wearing, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact of the matter is, of course, the former president discouraged wearing masks early on. Discouraged it. Oh, no, they don't need to wear masks. He had events that were spreader events, as we call it. But the gentleman heard me say, I think the president followed good advice and made a decision on warp speed that was helpful. Now, as the gentleman noticed, it was noted, it was the scientists at NIH and the scientists in the private sector and scientists throughout the world, but mainly our people who did an extraordinary thing in an extraordinary short time frame. Never been done before to develop this kind of a vaccine. You talk about the three vaccines, the three manufacturers, never been done before. So it was a wonderful event. Unfortunately, too many people are advising, don't take the vaccine. You don't have to take the vaccine. Don't sweat it. Now, very frankly, government tells people they've got to vaccinate their children to send them to school. Why? So other children don't get sick. I told you I had those great-grandchildren who are in school, 3 of whom are in school. And you know, they have a child sits in front of them, a child sits to their right, a child sits to their left, and a child sits behind them. I want all of them well, because I don't want my grandchild, my great-grandchild, getting sick. Very frankly, I don't think there was a very successful effort either by the former president or by many on your side of the aisle to say, do what the scientists, you talk about science, do what the scientists tell you to do. Now, I notice most of your members are doing so now, but still some wear it as a badge of courage that they don't, and they raise money off it. I think that is harmful to our communities. And I think you sort of just set aside no plan. Well, no plan has resulted going from 1.7 million to 11.7 million tests per day. That's the plan. And we invested in March in the Recovery Act in making sure that health services could respond properly. A lot of money went into health, as you know, and testing in that rescue plan, the American Rescue Plan. So you keep saying there's no plan. We've adopted plans. We think they are positive plans. And we think, hopefully, that we're going to get better soon. But neither President Trump nor President Biden were responsible for this extraordinary virus. Our view is President Trump laid back for a long, long time before he really engaged heavily in this. And now he's changed his tune to a much more positive, listen to the scientists kind of attitude, which we welcome. But I disagree with the gentleman that there's not a plan. We adopted together in 2020 5 major pieces of legislation to address this challenge. And we have adopted in a partisan way, unfortunately, bills that continue to fight that fight, and I think is fighting it not as successfully because we have a new variant, much more transmissible, a different type. It is metastasized into a more communicable disease, and that's caused us a challenge. And we're addressing that, and we're accelerating the availability of resources to do so. I yield.
And thank the gentleman for yielding. And clearly, we have some disagreements, but
right.
As we both have advocated for the vaccine, I do think one of the differences that we may have is that I strongly feel that it's a personal decision. It's a medical decision. And if government thinks that shaming people and threatening people and firing people is going to address that challenge, they've missed the mark. And I just wish they would instead move away from the shaming and the firing, and hopefully the court, that the U.S. Supreme Court agrees with us and stops at least the firings of people by mandates from the government, and just encourage people to have that conversation with their doctor if they have hesitation, but ultimately it's a decision that each individual would have to make. And we will continue this conversation, I'm sure. And I would yield.
I just want to say, in terms of where we are today, the overwhelming percentage, I'm talking about 90%, of people who are getting really sick are people who are not vaccinated. And for the government to say, you need to be vaccinated, because we don't want you coming to the office, we don't want you coming with other people who are being careful, who have been vaccinated, who have done the responsible thing, and getting them sick. Because what we've seen, unfortunately, even with vaccination, people who are vaccinated, of our own members, on both sides of the aisle who have been vaccinated have gotten, thankfully, mild cases of COVID. But you know, when we talk about the president wanting people to get vaccinated, and you indicate that you and I are both advocates of that, or requiring them to get vaccinated. The reason you require people to get vaccinated, the more people you have unvaccinated, the more hosts this virus has to metastasize, to grow into different type of virus that can attack in different ways. That's why you do that. That's why they talk 70%. Now, we just have about 70% in America now. Very frankly, if we had a higher percentage, we'd be better off. So let's hope that, that we can work together to make sure that we give encouragement to people to do what the scientists, you talk about, the reason we were so successful in that year under warp speed of getting those 3 vaccines is because the scientists knew what had to be done. And they found out, and they had quick discoveries and eliminated a lot of dead ends relatively quickly because of our computer capability and transformation of information around the world and dead ends. If we listen to them, we'd be better off. But there are an awful lot of people who are saying, don't listen to them, don't do it. And when the gentleman says for health reasons, there are hundreds, probably billions, I don't know what the billions are, people have been vaccinated with a minuscule, almost undetectable adverse reaction. So I don't know what the gentleman talks about for health reasons. I know Djokovic says he's doing it for health reasons. I don't know what those are. Maybe you do. I'm not an expert enough to know what that is. But all the doctors I talk to, and certainly our own doctor here, who we consult with on a regular basis, I know both of us have done that, say, get the vaccine. So I would hope that all of us would ask our constituents, get the vaccine. It is good for you. It saves your lives. It saves your families. It saves others. Get it. I yield back.
And thanks. And to be clear, I never said it was for health reasons. I said it was a health decision. So this is a medical decision that people are making. And again, in the past, we've seen this suggested by some in the medical community inaccurately that if you get vaccinated, you can't get the virus. A Supreme Court justice said, if you get vaccinated, you can't spread the virus. That turned out to be false. We know whether vaccinated or not, you can get the virus. You can receive the virus. You can give it to other people. You can die. We know in the hospitals, the higher propensity of people in the hospitals are unvaccinated. Those are the kind of things that we should be encouraging to get the facts out, and then encouraging people to go make their decision with their doctor if they have concerns and questions. And there's valid questions. There's people in the past who have raised religious exemptions to other vaccines, and by the way, given approval for those religious exemptions that today are not getting similar religious exemptions for this. And so let's just treat it equally. Let's treat it fairly. Let's just focus on the facts. This idea that if you mandate something and threaten somebody, it's going to change behavior, it's just not proving itself to be correct, and it's causing more division and forcing people into corners that they shouldn't be on. And so hopefully, again, we can continue this conversation and get back to a place where we're in agreement, which we have been on things like Operation Warp Speed. But with that, I would be
happy
to yield back. Thank you to the Majority Leader. Madam Speaker, yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches.